and welcome back to another English lesson. Today we'll be focusing on a photograph by Shirley Tolson. This poem is placed right after a portrait of a lady in your chapter because these two pieces of literature share common themes with each other. As we've seen in A Portrait of a Lady, it's about a grandson telling us about his relationship with his grandmother and the changing themes of generational gap and then him losing his grandmother. This is exactly the same, except it's approached from a different perspective. This is about a mother talking about her daughter, and the mother and daughter sharing this moment over a photograph, and like it deals with themes of loss, nostalgia, and other things. This is a very powerful poem. It's very moving, the lines and everything else. The poem is written in blank verse. It doesn't have a rhyme scheme as such, so I will not be focusing on that. But there are certain tools used by the author to denote some rhymes at least. So we'll be focusing on this for a moment, and if you haven't seen A Portrait of a Lady video yet, you should go back and watch it because this is completely related to it. And so let's just get into the video, and I hope you guys have fun. So I'll be reading through the poem just to show you guys how the writer uses her words and how the poem flows. So follow along, it's on the screen as well, read along with me, and then we can delve more into the analysis side of things. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling, each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she the big girl, some 12 years or so. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born, and the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Some 20, 30 years later, she'd laugh at the snapshot. See Betty and Dolly, she'd say. And look how they dressed us for the beach. The sea holiday was her past, mine is her laughter. Both wry with the labored ease of loss. Now she's been dead nearly as many as years as that girl lived, and of this circumstance there is nothing to say at all. Its silence silences. So let's take a look at the poem as a whole. In the first lines of a photograph, the speaker begins by using the word cardboard to refer to a photograph. So as we all know, before the digital era, photographs were printed on paper, pasted on cardboard and put up in frames just so we can have something to look at, which is a very interesting contrast from now where we take hundreds of photos, but how many of them do we actually look at? So this photograph reminds her of a time when two girl cousins went paddling. In the photo, she sees them holding hands with her mother, who at that time was only 12 years old. This photograph was taken long before the speaker was born, but it is still capable of bringing back feelings of nostalgia for her. There is an interesting moment in line 8 when the speaker refers to the sea at their feet. It appears to have changed less, she says. This is in reference to the immense changes that came over the young women in the image. They grew up, at least one had children and has since died. In order to drive this point home, the speaker then adds that the girls have terrible transient feet. Beside being a great example of the literary device alliteration, this line also reminds the reader how time and change never stops progressing. So one of the key themes that we are looking at in the portrait of a lady and this poem is the fact that time never changes. Time just never stops changing. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. In the next lines of a photograph, the speaker takes the reader into her lifetime when 20, 30 years later, which means she doesn't really know how long ago it was, which is how memories are. We don't really keep track of every single detail of them. Her mother laughed with her at the photograph. She speaks about the girl cousins, Betty and Dolly. This was a tender memory in her mother's past, and the speaker compares it to an important one of her own, her mother's laugh. This is the first concrete evidence that the reader has that the mother has passed away. In the last lines, the speaker reveals that it has in fact been 12 years since her mother died. Her memories of her have shifted somewhat in that period, but she still gets emotional when she spends time thinking about her. The poem concludes with the speaker saying that there is nothing to say at all about the loss or the period since. This suggests that she doesn't quite have the words to describe it, or that there are really no words to adequately convey the ravages of time.